Okay, I think we're now live. I want to welcome everybody. This is Bernard Nomberg, and we are doing our series on Mondays and Thursdays, all during May and some in last month as well. We're having a series of discussions with different experts in different segments of society and how they're being impacted by the pandemic. And I've got my friend Jenny McInerney here, a local attorney with us today. Good afternoon, Jenny. Good to see you again.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you, Bernard.
I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us today. Jenny works with the local law firm of Carney Dye here in Birmingham. And what we're going to be talking about is estate planning concerns and considerations during the pandemic. And most people may think, well, what's the difference now between what I should have been doing all along? Most people may think, well, I'm still not going to do anything. And unfortunately, you read statistics that there is such a high percentage of people who don't have any estate planning information and documents and things to help others in your family. And that's why we're having this discussion today. And that's a little bit about what Jenny does. But Jenny, if you would tell the watchers and people who are on a little bit about yourself and your practice, and then we'll jump into this.
Okay, I'm Jenny McInerney. I am an attorney here at Carney Dye. We're kind of a boutique estate planning law firm, so we focus primarily on estate planning, handling estates once someone has passed, doing small business work, things along those lines. I came to this law firm this past year. I've been licensed for over 12 years. I'm licensed here in Alabama and in Mississippi. And while we do all types of estate planning here, my practice focuses a little more primarily on special needs trust planning. And all that is a fancy way to say doing your estate planning when you have a family member with a special needs. So it involves a little more complex planning. And so just to ensure that your beneficiary with special needs is protected and they can maintain government benefits when you pass, along those lines. So that's primarily the focus of my practice. As I also mentioned, I do some small business work as well, form businesses. I do a lot of nonprofit work. So if anyone has questions about nonprofits or how to get a nonprofit started or nonprofit compliance in Alabama, I do that work as well.
Well, very good. And again, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us. And what we're going to focus on is, since we are still in the pandemic and probably will be for weeks, if not months to come, today we're going to focus on what estate planning documents you should be concerned about and things that you maybe need to speak with your family members about. And these are not easy topics. They're not light issues, and it's very difficult sometimes for people to come to grips that they need to create such documents, because no one wants to think about their own mortality.
Right.
So Jenny, if you would share with us a little bit of what you and your colleagues at your practice are hearing or seeing from the public about these types of issues, and we'll get into the specific documents in a few minutes.
Right. So when you think of estate planning, we think of primarily three documents. One is your will, and that would be how you convey property or things once you have passed. But the other two documents are documents that go into effect or control should you become incapacitated in some form. And so right now, when we're in the pandemic, we're seeing more questions related to those documents. And those documents would be your advanced healthcare directive and your durable power of attorney. And what those documents are is they focus primarily on who should assume responsibility or take over your affairs if you aren't able to do it yourself. Who should become temporary guardians should something happen to you and your spouse and you have minor children. All of these are really important things to think about, especially right now where we're in a pandemic, where it is very likely that once one spouse gets it, another will get it as well. And you've got to be prepared, because when you're in that state and you're already ill, that's not the time to start the process of your estate planning. One, it's just probably not feasible time-wise. And two, you might be in an altered state mentally from medication and treatment. So what's really important about those documents, first, your durable power of attorney. We can talk about that. That appoints someone to kind of take over your financial affairs if you're unable to do so. So, some viewers may be thinking, well, what does that have to do with the pandemic? It actually has a lot. So, and here's why. Should something happen to you or you and your spouse and you're both in a hospital and you're incapacitated, who's paying your bills? Who's making sure your mortgage gets paid? If something arises that needs a legal signature, who can do that? If you haven't set this up, you don't have anyone to kind of take charge. We also use our durable power of attorney in an event of incapacity to appoint a temporary guardian for minor children. And so for a lot of parents who are thinking about, who should assume responsibility of their children, that allows them to carry on. If your children need to go to the doctor, if they need, documents signed for the school year to start and you're unable to do so, that document and having it in place would ensure that life would continue for your children and for those around you, and that your affairs would be protected while you're getting treatment.
And I want the viewers who are watching and listening either live or later on to understand, for those of you who may not realize, when you're admitted into the hospital these days, your family members do not come with you into the hospital. They may be able to communicate by way of phone or FaceTime like this or Zoom, whatever, with the hospital personnel or with yourself. But when you're in that hospital, and if you don't have such documents that Jenny's already mentioned or that are coming up that we're about to discuss, it creates a very confusing time, not only for yourself, but also for the hospital personnel and the loved ones that you have who are home. And all of these documents are just meant to provide guidance from a legal standpoint for people who need that information. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jenny, but I wanted people to understand, just because you're diagnosed, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to the hospital or becoming incapacitated. Every situation is a little bit different, but these documents, once you get them done, they're done. You may need to amend them later on, but continue, Jenny. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but for those of you watching now or later on, I've put Jenny's the link to her profile on her firm's website in the show notes here. And if you have questions or comments, please throw them in the comment section. I'll field them and we'll get them to her. But go ahead, Jenny. I'm sorry.
Thanks. Well, another document that most people are aware of is your healthcare directive. Mm-hmm. And what that document does is it allows you to appoint, it does two things. One of the things it does is allows you to appoint a healthcare proxy. And that person is someone that you've chosen to make certain medical decisions on your behalf. It also allows access to medical records and information. But a lot of the questions that we've gotten, there's kind of your standard healthcare directive that most people who've executed them are aware of. They cover two major areas and allow you to make choices on what kind of care you would want in different scenarios. One is if you are terminally ill, which essentially would mean that you are going to die in the near future, but you're unconscious. Another would be in a permanent state of unconsciousness, meaning you can't feel, you don't know that you're alive, you don't even have that sense of awareness. And in those two scenarios, you choose in your healthcare directive if you would like to have artificially provided food and hydration. And you also choose whether you would want medical intervention. So that could be a ventilator. It could be machines that are breathing for you and keeping you alive. It could be surgeries. It could be medications, any of those variables. But, that's typically what a healthcare directive covers. And then you give power to your proxy. So you can choose. On our forms that we prepare, we allow the individual to choose whether the healthcare proxy either can only follow what you've written in the document. The second option is to follow only what's in the document, but can make decisions not included. And the third option is to say, I trust my healthcare proxy to follow what I've stated, but they can make any decision and their decision is final. And that's kind of where we've had a lot of questions during this pandemic, because obviously no one contemplated COVID-19. No one has contemplated any of the things that we're living through right now. And that's just a really good lesson in general for your healthcare directive, that it's impossible to anticipate every possible scenario that could arise during a medical situation. And so what I've advised my clients is, to consider that third choice, to allow your healthcare proxy to make any decision. And in doing so, I've encouraged my clients to have those tough conversations with their loved ones that they have designated as their healthcare proxy, to let them know, hey, I've chosen you, and here are my thoughts and feelings on treatment for COVID. Here are my thoughts and feelings on experimental drugs and experimental treatments. Here are my thoughts and feelings on all of these different scenarios. Because having those tough conversations that nobody wants to have at least allows that individual to hear what those wishes are, so that when that time arises, they can make those choices, and make those choices knowing what that person wants.
Once you have those conversations with your loved ones or your trusted people in your circle, you probably will feel a lot better once you have it out there as well. It's not something that's in the back of your mind about, oh, I dread that conversation. Have that conversation, then go the next step. Get in touch with Jenny, get in touch with a trusted attorney who knows how these documents operate, why they're important, and get it done, and just put it behind you and move on to something fun. None of this is fun, but it's part of being an adult. It's a necessary thing you need. If you have loved ones in your life, that's why you do this.
That's right. And, keep in mind, in the state of Alabama, you're a legal adult at the age 19. So if you have children who are in college, like I do, these are conversations that we've had with our daughter. Look, you've got to execute these documents, because if you don't, we don't have the authority to speak to the hospital staff, to tell them what you would and wouldn't want. And that's so important, because when you're 19 or 20, you're not thinking about the possibility that you could get sick and be on a ventilator or potentially die. And so, as awkward as these conversations are, if you can show them, how important it is. I mean, look, I've had these conversations with my parents. It's not something they want to talk about. But it is something that I say, look, we need to have these conversations. I need to know what your wishes are. Let's talk about it. When you're ready to talk about it, I want you to know that I need to know, and kind of give them that time to think about these choices and to communicate them. Not everyone will be prepared for that conversation when you're prepared for it.
And Jenny, you've mentioned a will. You've mentioned the durable power of attorney. You've mentioned the healthcare directive or the healthcare. Are these documents, particularly the latter two, do they have other names that they also go by, or that's what they're known for?
So that's typically what they're known for. Some people ask for the HIPAA release information. We include that in our advanced healthcare directive. Okay. We include those medical records, so you just have one document. I also would throw this out there as a helpful tip for those who have documents like this. I always encourage my clients who have older parents, who have health issues, who have healthcare directives. I encourage them just to keep a PDF copy on their cell phone. So should an emergency arise and you run to the hospital to meet them, or you run to the house to handle the situation as, the adult child and kind of in charge. You're not having to stop and think, oh, do I have their healthcare proxy with me? Or do I have X document with me? If you have those documents, I made a little note on my iPhone, and I've just uploaded my parents' medical information. I have their, durable powers of attorney there, and I have their advanced healthcare directives there, so that if we're in the hospital, I can just email it to the nurse, I can text it to the nurse, and they can upload it into their system. And that's been taken care of.
And original documents aren't necessary. Valid copies are okay.
Yeah, some places will say, oh, we need an original. And in that case, you can have someone go get it, or you can get it yourself. But at least while you're getting it, you can show them and kind of have that authority. I ran into that a couple of years ago when my father had a stroke and my mother was out of town. And I rushed to meet the ambulance on site. And, it didn't even occur to me at that moment to start thinking, do I have these documents with me? And so that's kind of just a personal lesson that I learned about having those handy.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you just joining me, we're talking with Jenny McInerney with the Carney Dye law firm here in Birmingham. The subject that we're talking about is estate planning concerns and documents, and how to talk to family, why you should talk to your family, just things that we're in the pandemic. You don't know what the future holds for you at all, but much less what's going on right now. But these are just certain documents that you really should have on your person, on your phone or somewhere. Jenny, what recommendations do you have for the original documents? Where should those be housed?
So typically we tell people don't put them in a bank lockbox, because if you and your spouse are the only two on that who are authorized to access that lockbox, and then in an emergency, you may not be able to get access to it, especially if both of you have been in a car accident, or if you're both with COVID, no one will be able to get access to it. So what we recommend is just put it in a safe place. Let your, appointed durable power of attorney that you've appointed, let your healthcare proxy that you've appointed, let them know where you've stored them. So we have a very clear place that we've put them in one of our filing cabinets at home. And we've told our children where it is. I periodically would check in with my parents and ask them, where have you put these documents, just in case I ever need to know. And we always just say, keep them there. We also encourage people not to distribute multiple copies of these documents, because as you mentioned earlier, these are documents that you can, and we encourage you to update as the years go by. And we don't want multiple copies kind of floating around that could contradict one another.
You may not know where the other copies are at the time, and so you gotta make sure you get them all back so that you update just one set and you only have that one.
Right.
Yeah. What about right now? We're in a graduated, safer at home right now, and hopefully we eventually get back to some sense of normalcy from a interaction in person. But we don't know if there's going to be another wave of this into the future. The question becomes, well, how are you doing consultations for people who want to start this process? First of all, how do they get in touch with you? And secondly, how's your practice handling consultations to start this process of getting this paperwork done?
So most of our consultations we're doing via Zoom, or Google Meet, a telephone, however someone feels comfortable using this technology, to just kind of get to know what their wishes are. We kind of walk through the estate planning process. There's a lot of complexity with estate planning, depending on the structure of your assets, the structure of your family, kind of your wishes and your desires. So we're doing a lot of these meetings by Zoom, and then we will draft documents, send them to the clients, talk them through those documents, and then we schedule a virtual signing meeting. Now we are starting to have in-person meetings again for signings. But as of right now, we're still authorized to conduct some of these meetings by Zoom. And the governor has issued 2 orders that both are still in play. One was on March 26th, which authorized virtual notaries who were under the direction of a licensed attorney in the state of Alabama to do virtual signings. That order was amended April 2nd. That added a provision that required those meetings to be recorded, for that recording to be retained for the next 5 years. So, that's what we're doing. We're just having these meetings. We send copies of all of our documents to the client, and we do the meeting just like we would do it here. We walk through the document, we explain anything or any questions that anyone has, and then we execute the documents. We have our client sign a form indicating that they did it virtually. And then we have our notary and 2 witnesses on the Zoom call. Everything's being recorded. And then we keep a copy of that recording, just like we keep a copy of all of the documents that the client signed.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, what is a living will? And have you already explained that? And maybe it's just called something different.
Right. So a living will is the same as that healthcare directive. So that's typically, it can be called a living will. There's the HIPAA release. They're all kind of merged into that advanced healthcare directive. And what that living will is that's what your wishes are while you're alive. And that typically is pertaining to your medical care. So that would be covered under that advanced healthcare directive.
Okay. Another question is what is a living trust? And is that something I need to worry about right now?
So typically individuals who are interested in getting a living trust, it's where you have a trust while you're still alive. So typically as estate planning attorneys, most of our trusts that are being created through the will. They kind of spring into action once someone has passed. But a living will is kind of alive. It's a kind of, if you imagine, kind of like an entity, a business that you can people will deed their homes into a living trust. And typically we advise people to consider living trusts if they want to avoid probate when they die. And that trust is holding those assets that would typically have to pass through probate. Or if they have property in multiple states, because if you pass away, you would have to open a probate in each one of those states in order to convey that property. So if you own property in multiple states, it's a good idea to have a living trust. But if you're like most of us, you probably only have your home, your main residence. And unless there's a reason why you're wanting to avoid probate, we typically just encourage people to kind of skip that and just have a typical will, because your probate isn't as expensive and it isn't as complicated as most people think. And so the desire to kind of avoid probate, by the time you paid the fees for opening an estate for probate, it comes out about even for your legal fees to set up a living trust. So it kind of just depends on your assets, whether or not you need one.
Gotcha. Here's another question. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can get in touch through our you can just call our office. We have someone who's checking all of our calls right now. You can just email me directly, jennifer@carneydye.com. Okay. Or you can just go into our website. There's a contact us box you can kind of fill out that goes to one of our staff.
And the office number?
802-0696.
205-802.
205, yes.
You're based in Birmingham. Does your practice, is it limited to the state of Alabama, or can people outside the state of Alabama call you and use your services?
Right. So I am licensed in Mississippi, so I can do this type of work in Mississippi as well. Mm-hmm. But outside of Alabama, Mississippi, that's kind of where we're restricted. Now we counsel clients who may have property here in Alabama but may live somewhere else. So it's not completely restricted to just those 2 states.
Well, guys, thank you. For those of you who are just joining us or may watch us later on, talking with Jenny McInerney, we're talking and dealing with estate planning concerns during the pandemic, wills, healthcare directives, durable power of attorneys. Those are the 3 big documents that you really should consider putting into place. Having those tough conversations with family members will pay off later on, and you can put it behind you. Any other, as we get close to the end of our discussion, Jenny, any other things that come to mind that for people who, regardless if you've got all these documents in place and you've done all of this, or people who just have not done any of this, what is the mindset? Because this is already a very heavy time period. Mm-hmm. People are stuck at home. They're bored. They're not all doing TikTok dances, but they're doing other things, hopefully to occupy their time. But this is a very important topic, and it's a family thing that needs to be discussed. So I want to leave it with you to kind of share with our public of some things that why they need this.
You know, I always tell people that the greatest gift that you can give your family is an estate plan, is to leave that document that instructs them of how to handle situations with your interest in mind, like what you would want. You know, leaving that roadmap for them will make all the difference. You know, nobody wants to make these difficult medical decisions, and it puts a lot of strain and pressure on family members who are having to make these decisions. But if you've left those instructions and said, this is what I want you to do, it just makes it that much easier in a really difficult time. A lot of my clients get really overwhelmed when they start thinking about what they need to do and how they should do it. And there's so many questions and pieces. But I recommend, we have some resources on our website. You can download those resources. There's a resource tab. You can download those forms and just start, filling it out. Start getting an idea. Just start somewhere. And then give us a call and we can kind of walk you through the process. You don't have to have all the answers. That's what we're here for. We're here to give you other ideas. Some people say, I don't have family members who can do all of these things. So we kind of help you think outside the box of other people who can fill those roles. And so I just encourage you, just get started because it's so important to have an attorney help you develop these documents.
And that's one of the key reasons why we're having this conversation and others like it is it's already stressful enough. If you don't have the answers, that just compounds your stress. Getting the answers, hearing from experts like Jenny, that's where you need to just start. Jenny, I want to thank you again for being on the show, spending some time, sharing your expertise with us. A lot of very helpful information today, so thank you.
Thank you, Bernard.
Always my pleasure. And guys, as we're doing on Mondays and Thursdays, and I'm putting in the show notes, the upcoming shows that are coming up, I'm also putting in there a link so that if you want to see the past shows, are also another clickable link on there. But as always, be patient, be smart, be mindful of those around you and others. We're going to get through this. We just don't know when it's going to be over. But thank you again for stopping by a little bit, and we hope to see you on Thursday. Y'all be well.